In this video, we're going to make a responsive card grid that resizes based on whatever screen size you have. We're going to learn about auto layout and min and max sizes. So let's jump right in. So first we need a card, for which I've already made a wireframe and I've picked out some colors that I'm going to use. So let's start by making this image thumbnail. I'll hit R and drag out a rectangle. I want this to be in the ratio of 16:9, so I'll make the width 160 and the height 90. And I'm going to hit this icon over here to lock the aspect ratio. So now I can resize it freely and it'll always stay in the 16:9 ratio. Let's give it a nice border radius and I'm going to give it a stroke as well, so there's some better separation from the background. Now let's find a nice image for this. For this, I'm going to use a plugin called Pop Image, and I'm going to find a nice image on Google and right click and copy image address. And in here, I'm going to paste the image URL and I'm going to click pop. And this will just pop in the image. Next, I need the title and the subtitle. So I'll hit T and create my title. I'll double click so it just hugs the contents. Since I want the title to be prominent, I'll make it semi-bold and give it a size of 20 pixels. Then I'll just option drag this to duplicate it, and I want this to be less prominent. So let's just make it smaller and lighter in terms of weight and type in the subtitle. Now the next thing we need is these 3 profile pictures and some text to go along with it. So I'm going to hit O, and while holding shift, I'm going to drag out a circle. Now duplicate it 3 times, and I am going to look for a plugin called User Profile. Select all 3 circles and click Insert Random Photo. And now we have your placeholder profile pictures. Select them, hit Shift A. That adds a frame around it, an auto layout frame. Let's call it Avatar Group. And I'm going to change the gap to a -8 pixels so that we have this overlapping effect going on here. I can also click on the auto layout settings and choose if I want the last object to be on top or the first object. In this case, I want the first one to be on top. Next, we need this supporting text to go along with it. So I'll just drag my subtitle and change the properties, make it even smaller and change the color to a lighter one. And then change the text in here. Okay, so let's say these are friends who are also attending the event. Now we'll select the avatar group and the text and hit Shift A to put them in another auto layout frame so they are always aligned. And I'll call this going, set the gap to 8 pixels. Next, we need this button and this icon button. So I'm gonna hit T. Let's say the button says find tickets, make it semi-bold, hit Shift A with the text box selected and call it button. Add a fill, and I'll pick the color that I had chosen. So it's this blue. Round the corners, give it some padding, and set the height to 40 pixels. Now let's make the secondary button, option drag to duplicate it, and change the fill to a transparent white so it looks gray. And for this one, I want it to be an icon button. So I'll look for the plugin called Material Symbols, and I'll search more. And I click on this 3-dot icon. Now it's in here, but we can't see it because it's black. So I'll change the color and we have our icon. Now hit Command X and select the text that you want to replace with the icon and hit Command Shift R. And I'm going to set the width to 40 for this because I want it to be a circle, and select both the buttons and hit Shift A, call it a button group. We did this because we want these two to always maintain their alignment and their gap. So now we have all of the content of our card. There's one more thing we need. This is an icon. So let me just add the icon here as well. It's supposed to be a heart icon, and I'm just going to keep it here on the side for now. We'll add this into the card in a bit, but let's just create the card now. I select everything in here and hit Shift A. Now everything is in an auto layout frame. Call it card. Let's give it a fill so we can see what's going on. Let's give it some padding and gap. And for the corner radius, let's make it 12 plus 16. So that's the corner radius of the image plus the padding. Let's also add a stroke to this, so there's some separation from the background. Now you'll see we have a card, but there's empty space and then there are things that are going out of the card. So let's select everything in the card and set the width to fill container. Select this text and set this to fill container as well. And now when you resize your card, you see everything resizes accordingly except this button. So we need to set this to fill container as well. And now everything is great. Now we need to add this icon in our card, and I want it to be on the top right. If I just drag it in here, auto layout will force it to be aligned with everything, and we have set the alignment to left, so that's what it's going to follow. But we can come over here and click this button to ignore auto layout. And now I can move this around anywhere I want, and I'll just move it here on the right. I'll just align it to the right and top. This is top, and just move it in a bit, and this looks good. I'll also add a little shadow, so there's some more separation between the icon and the image. And we have a card. I am going to create a component out of this. Now, there's one more thing that I noticed. The gap between the title and the subtitle is a bit too much for my liking. So I'm going to select these two and hit Shift A to create an auto layout for them as well. So now I can set the gap between them independently, and I'll set it to 4 pixels. Everything else still has a gap of 16 pixels, but these two have a gap of 4 pixels. Now that we have a card, let's make a grid. So I'll option drag to duplicate this, and I'm going to duplicate it a bunch of times and select everything and hit Shift A. So let me just rename this to grid. Add some padding, set a reasonable gap. Let's give it a nice fill. So now you'll notice when we resize this, the number of column changes based on how many columns the frame can hold, but there's still a lot of empty space in here. Now Figma did automatically apply the wrap setting. If it was the vertical setting, everything would be just stacked on top of each other. If it was the horizontal setting, everything would be side by side, but we want wrap. Now we need to make it such that it fills the empty space as well. I'm going to select all of these cards and I'm going to change the width to fill container. But now it messed everything up. That's because we haven't set the minimum and maximum width that we want for the card. So I'm going to select the card component and I'm going to click on this drop down next to width and add a minimum width of 240 pixels, and then click again on the drop down and add a maximum width of 480 pixels. And now our grid looks good. Now when I resize it, let's say this is a mobile size, it looks good. And when it gets bigger, and now this is more like a tablet size, it fills in the space, but it also maintains the minimum and maximums, and laptop, and it just keeps it responsive. But at the bottom, we have a problem. The top two rows look fine, but the last two cards are too big. Figma right now does not have a setting where you can set the size of all the objects to be the same. So what I do right now, I have a little trick that I'll share with you. You create a rectangle in here and apply the same settings that you applied to your card. So you set it to fill container. You add a minimum width, which is the same as the minimum width on your card, and add a maximum width that is also the same as your card. Since we don't want to see this, I'm going to decrease the height of this, and I'm going to remove the fill. So it's invisible, but it takes up space, and I'm going to duplicate it a bunch of times. So what happens now is it fills the empty space and our cards remain the correct size. So now I can resize it as much as I want, and our cards always look good.